All right, so based on, this is a very busy slide. You don't need to read it all. But based on what we have heard from the steering committee and the work group content folks, these are the draft learning outcomes that we've envisioned, okay? And I think they speak to some of the themes that have been addressed so far. We've got defining key terms, so the vocabulary, the jargon, how to interpret and that was good. How to interpret and communicate the findings of research, how to identify resources. We want folks to leave this training educated, but also willing to learn more and recognizing that this is a growing and expanding and ever-changing field. How to be able to discuss and evaluate the promises, limitations, and controversies, interpret the strengths, weaknesses, and the potential outcomes of big data, and ultimately identify opportunities for participating in and informing discussions around big data. So these are the core themes that we're using right now to build out this training program. The wording of these can be very important because we want to ultimately evaluate how successful this training program is. And so these are, again, up for improvement, and we look forward to your ideas and thoughts on how to expand, tweak, and edit these particular learning outcomes. Whoops. All right. So, as I say, we're envisioning about a 2.5-day training program. And day one will start with the basics, introducing big data and data science, the key definitions and key concepts. In effect, we're going to introduce people to this really complex world. We've got to give them the tools to start before they can actually engage and do important work. Then we're envisioning that they will engage with, and by engage we're talking about close discussions, interpretations, analysis of 4 different case studies over the period of time. The first case study will be 23 and, well, could be, we're envisioning it, could be, again, draft, plan, 23andMe, which is a genomics-based approach, pulling in data across any number of diseases. I think at last count, 23andMe is integrating their genomics data set with over 240 different research projects across a variety of conditions. That raises all sorts of interesting possibilities and concerns around the use of big data. So it'll be a nice intro case study that many people are going to be familiar with just because of the commercial nature of 23andMe and similar companies. So I think it will be a nice entry into some of the basic concepts. Then we'll move into the remainder of the day in understanding and using big data and the research approaches around that. And this is really where we start to introduce people to the meat of how big data are used in current research approaches. And we'll transition into a second case study, which is the Sentinel initiative and the IMEDS program, which is linked with FDA. We'll end each day with a reflection and evaluation where we can get a sense of what has been clear and what has been unclear through the day for the participants so that we can come in and assist the facilitators in day 2 with making revisions to the program, trying to be adaptable to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the people in the room. Day 2, we'll come in, we're envisioning right now, we'll kick off with Jeopardy. And Jeopardy will be a fun way to review what they've learned from day 1 and get a sense of what concepts might still be a little bit uncertain, unclear for them. We'll move into some of the other challenges around big data. How to make this work. If you are running a big data study, you are receiving millions of data points. How do you actually do that in a way to yield successful outcomes, both as a scientist, but eventually as a healthcare provider? One of the case studies that we'll pull in there is Flatiron Health, major cancer-based study. We'll then transition into ethics and privacy. And these are some of the core concerns around the use of big data. Ownership of big data, access to data that are being shared, and we'll transition then to our final case study, which we're going to use patients like me, which is a large group that is pulling in data from patients all over the country. I looked at their website recently, and I think they have over 100,000 patient participants at this point. 400,000? Yeah, sorry, 400,000. Yes, we have experts in the room. I shouldn't be doing that. But in over 2,500 conditions, I think. So amazing potential. But again, those are data that are freely being shared. It comes back to the challenges. What do we do with all of this information? How do we make it effective? Again, we'll wrap up day 2 with some reflection and evaluation. I don't know if we'll do Jeopardy again on day 3. We'll see how effective that is. And day 3 is envisioned as a half day where we really start to bring this all together with how can these advocates now go out and use this information. What are the resources they have available that will become available? What is the future of big data in healthcare research? How can advocates best use the training that they have to go forward? I know Reagan-Udall is talking about building a community of practice around this training, an online community for continuing education in the future. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to introduce, if not this community, at least the concept of the community, to get them prepared to engage further into the future. And then again, a time for reflection and evaluation. I will say that there's an integrated evaluation component to this that I'm not articulating here, which will be, we'll evaluate, send out a survey to the folks who will participate before they even land in the training program. We'll be evaluating individual components of the training program throughout the pilot phase to make sure that each section is effective. And then we'll do a post-training survey, and I'm hopeful that we'll do another one about 3 or 4 months later and really see how have these advocates started to use this information. Have they identified subsequent gaps that we can use to improve the training program? Our approach to this is very much like how I kicked off this particular session. So one great quote is, the only source of knowledge is experience. I could stand up here and talk to you for 2.5 days, and you would leave with some concept of big data, but not a real engaged understanding of the issues around big data. So we are really going to take what we call an active learning approach. We're going to build a workbook that will be used throughout the training program that the advocates will take with them. In that workbook, there'll be a handful of different activities that they'll be engaging in, sometimes individually, oftentimes with groups. We'll be grouping people according to the kinds of advocacy that they do, sometimes with similar advocates, sometimes with different advocates. And so they'll be able to take that workbook and have that as a resource where they can go back and reflect on the learning that they did during the 2.5 days. For the various activities that we do, we're really going to look beyond simply information, okay? The traditional lecture approach is, here's the information, I'm the expert, here you go. We're taking a different approach, and that is to show how this information that they're about to receive is going to be personally relevant, professionally relevant, provide that information, and then provide the space to practice using that information, and then ultimately applying that information in a relevant way. And that's really the philosophy that underlies the approach that we'll take. The rest of the time that I have on the agenda is really time for you, Q&A for us. Again, I've got Emily and Lisa here as part of our team. Another member, Sabrina Kramer, couldn't be here. We're here. My email address is here. We want to hear ways to improve this training, whether it's today, whether it's 2 weeks from now when you have a brainstorm in the middle of the night. We want this to be the most effective training that it can be. And so I appreciate your time and look forward to hearing more from you now. How many people will be a part of the pilot training? Right now, we're envisioning about 20. At least that's based on the numbers that we've heard right now. And I think the plan will be, and Diana and Alicia can correct me, 3 to 4 pilot trainings over a 12-month period, at which point we'll have evaluation data from hopefully, what would that be, 70, 80 people who've gone through the training. And that should be really useful in polishing the final product, if you will.
One of the reasons I ask, and one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, it's sort of like intervention and outcomes. Is it possible to be proactive and think about where folks are participating in the pilot training, then ultimately test their newly found knowledge and skills, and can we essentially create a quick learning loop around that? And I don't know if that's been part of what we've been talking about specifically.
I think it's a great idea. I think there's some question about what experiences the advocates will come in with. I think the expectation is that they will be solidly patient advocates as opposed to just patients. And this was a discussion that came out at one of the tables, is that the expectation, at least as we've been presented, is these are people who are experienced in their advocacy roles, but will benefit from having this knowledge around the use of big data. So this kind of interesting new tool within their toolbox, so to speak, as they go out and perform their advocacy role. But will we get a predominance of people who are out doing policy type advocacy, or will we get a predominance of people who are out working with researchers and scientists? I'm not sure if that's clear, if we have a sense of how that might play out. And I think that would almost be necessary in order to inform that loop that you're describing.
Yes and no. I think it's important to inform the loop, but we also can be thoughtful up front about what's the distribution of opportunities that folks might be involved in. I mean, I'll be very explicit. So I work at a company called Flatiron Health, which I think is case 3. And we have a large distribution of potential activities that patient advocates would be a huge addition to the conversation. And some are in the policy space, some are in the research and discovery space, some are in the healthcare delivery space. And so you could imagine already being proactive and saying if a patient advocate has a certain area of interest, we are already seeing places where that might be matched, and we could use that as the opportunity to sort of pressure test how things are working.
Yeah, that's helpful and clarifies. I think we are trying to envision and ensure that our activities will be relevant for the various types of advocates who would come into the training program. So that, as I say, we may group policy-related advocates together for some activities so that they can learn and grow from each other, but then spread them out and make more heterogeneous groups for certain activities where they can inform each other about their advocacy activities and their perspectives on how big data may or may not be useful or concerning, et cetera, in their various roles. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Sharing of lessons learned, I think, will be really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is kind of going off on a similar topic, but I think big data is so huge. It's big, right? So you have EHR data, you have claims data, you have patient-generated data, social networking data. I think you really almost might want to seed this first training session, not necessarily to train advocates for Flatiron, but of people with relevant experiences. You have to learn the whole thing, but to 2.5 days to do it all, and because it also goes back to the use cases, because, well, you call them case studies, but I think each one of those should be selected based on a success or an application that you could use in advocacy. And I'm not sure 23andMe is a good one, because I think the people who are associated with it might be negatively, because they got into some trouble with the FDA. They've clarified some of it, but again, I think looking at successes and ways to drive participation in the future and seeding a group with like-minded interests, because 20 isn't a lot of people. So if you start, you really want to apply this and show success so that it's sustainable.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, there was a question back there, and then we'll come back here.
Comment and also following on Megan's comment, I think there maybe there's room with this initial cohort to identify some potential projects that they might do after, as sort of a way of being able to engage them not only during this training, but because they are the inaugural group, that they give us some opportunity to identify some projects that they might want to get involved in. Maybe those of us who are case studies might actually even have some examples where we might use an advocate to help disseminate some of that. So, we have an ambassadors group at Patients Like Me. There's like 1,500 people there that actually look for opportunities to do some sort of outreach outside of our company to elevate that advocacy kind of work. So I can imagine that there could be almost a requirement of those who want to come into the training to say, we would like you to propose some opportunity for dissemination or some other way of being able to take what you've learned. Or you could potentially be proactive about it and say, here's 4 projects or here's 3 projects that we have identified with some external partners who would be interested in allowing you the opportunity to test your learning. But I think we probably need to be proactive about it, because I do think it would be an opportunity lost if we didn't find some way of learning from what they learned in real time practice.
I'm certainly open to that. I think that's a decision that's above and beyond the curriculum design group. I think depending on the kinds of how do I phrase this? I think it's tricky to have each one of these designed for a different set of advocates. That's increasing the amount of work and revision that has to go into each offering. So keeping it more general and applicable to a wider range of folks, I think there's some benefits of that, efficiencies there. If, on the other hand, the Reagan-Udall wants to have advocates who are coming in almost applying for this to say, this is why I want this training, this is how I would propose to use this training, we could certainly use that information to inform how the cases are presented, maybe different cases. We are also envisioning this pre-survey to find out where the advocates are, what experiences do they have, what are their interests, and so forth. But we could seed that with other questions as well about how would you like to use this training? How do you, are you linked with, are you an ambassador already for a certain group, for instance? How would you want to use this? So I'm certainly open to that, and again, I think that's a decision that needs to flow to me rather than me doing that. There was a question back here.
I do think you can have different stakeholder groups. Oh, sorry. You can have different stakeholder groups and use collaborative learning or a platform that allows them to work well amongst themselves, and then also collaborate across these different stakeholder groups. And then, like you said, there's nothing like experience. Maybe take a small example of applying technology to derive your big data results and trends and applications. Take it as a small set, but get these different stakeholder groups to collaborate so that you're doing it as in the real world. Otherwise, it could take a lot longer if you're just focusing on one stakeholder group and then you try to expand from there. It could take a year. So I'm just saying that you could use different ways to solve the problem here.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I work with a lot of volunteer kind of groups that have a day job, and can you review the assumption on what this will cost for a person to give 2.5 days to this, and where their scholarship potential is, that kind of thing?
I don't have the answer to that, actually. Diana?
The group I work with has a lot of groups who can't leave for 2.5 days, and I'm just worried
That's right.
about the very small volunteer groups.
Yeah, so I will say that we're envisioning the curriculum around 2.5 days, with that ending half day as one that, I don't want to use the word optional, but is less critical, so that this could fit within a weekend and make it a little bit more feasible for folks who are volunteering their time, so to speak. As for cost and other things, that's...
I think that's something that we're still going to continue to talk about and discuss among the steering committee and internally. So that's sort of still up in the air. But I mean, we are recognizing that 2.5 days is a significant time away, especially for people who work. So we're looking into different opportunities for that, and that's still something we're going to be doing a lot of discussing.
Other questions?
Kind of related to that, is the sort of curriculum structure that you described, how amenable is that to conversion into a, sort of an online kind of a format? Given all the, obviously the very useful interactions amongst people in the room, but then how does that, is that translatable to something that, would be easier for folks who are volunteers who can't give 2.5 days? I know that this is at least notionally on the plan, but I'm just kind of curious, funding and other things aside, the particular kind of curriculum that you're kind of putting together, is that translatable to a different sort of context?
We certainly hope so. I think that's the idea, is recognizing that eventually we'll want to put at least the basic content online, the outline of the case studies and so forth, and then I think the trick or the transition piece would be how to envision activities that would be amenable to the online space. And so we've put that particular activity on hold for now. We are just working on the in-person, but I think as we go through this, we are mindful in the back of our heads to say, all right, if this were going to go online, could we do something with this? I think we feel reasonably confident that what we have so far could be there. It might look quite different for some parts of it, but I think there's that potential. And that does link back into the community of practice idea. And for this community of practice to serve both folks who've gone through the training, but also folks who haven't been able to go through the training, can they still come in and get the material that they need to benefit from the more advanced members, if you will, of that community?
I guess related, but I feel like there has to be a pretty...
I think, I'm a long-time advocate and done a lot of this kind of stuff, but I think there needs to be some sort of pretty strict criteria for this first class. I understand you want to keep it, blended, but criteria. So recognizing that they're leaders and going to be able to apply it and almost give some prestige to it to make it, worthy of committing 2.5 days to it. So I don't know if it's fellows for this or some sort of steering committee for this community of practice, but it should, there's a lot riding on learning from this and kind of sustaining it and evolving. So I think the criteria, I don't know if that's part of content, but I've done this a lot. You can't take all comers. It really needs to, they need to have letters of support. It should be pretty, it needs to be pretty intense.
Yeah, again, that's a decision for other people, but great feedback. So again, my contact information is there. I don't have an administrative assistant. It's going to come right to me. So, and I'm happy to get your feedback and pass it along to our group. We've got an excellent group of people who have strong education backgrounds and can really take this content and I think make it effective for people and engaging so that they'll be able to walk away from 2 or 2.5 days or however long and feel like they have the tools to go out and improve their advocacy.
One more question. This may be for Diana as well. As we develop this content, it seems to parallel as we think about patient-centered drug development. And the one thing that I was thinking about as we were kind of going through this conversation is, first of all, having the FDA very aware of the advocates that are coming out of this program in preparation for patient-centered drug design, and recognizing that as we don't know what's going to happen with 21st century cures and other things, but certainly in a cures landscape where patients are more involved early in drug development and big data is intended to be a part of the drug development landscape, these two pieces clearly come together. And so making sure that we've kept that kind of front and center at one point or another.
Yeah. Oh, that's something that we have identified, and we need to keep working on it. So yeah, so we can chat.
All right, shall we transition then? Okay, great. Thank you all.